Okay, students, welcome back to our Entity Framework lecture. So this is a continuation of the previous week where we covered Entity Framework and being able to connect to your database and being able to migrate a table over into your EDMX or Entity Data Model in Visual Studio. So this week we're going to continue with our idea of Entity Framework, and we're going to do a little bit more work on using stored procedures to do some work in our data model. So first I'm going to go into my main user form over here. So last week I had a couple of buttons, get users and get only active users. So first what I'm going to do is I'm going to put a text area to display the users on my screen here so I can start working with them. I'm going to build some stored procedures to insert new users and whatnot. So let's go, I'm looking for a text. What am I looking for here? Maybe a list box. Let's go to list box. Alright, so here's a list box. I'm going to go ahead and click and drag that on my screen. Let's go ahead and give it a better name. So I want to go ahead and Alt Enter. Let's get rid of this window down here, the output window. Okay. The name list box 1, let's go ahead and call that user LST user. That's good enough. So list box for users, or I guess we can make that plural, LST users. So here's our user administration system. So let's let's first set when the form loads. So let's say LST users.items.add please select the users you would like to work with. So essentially what we're doing is we're going to force the user of this application to select one of these buttons. Do you want to get all active users or get users? And what we're going to be doing is getting all active users. So please select the users you would like to work with. So we can say get active users, and whenever they hit one of these buttons, so we have these users and active users. So then let's go ahead and send the users to the list box. So let's say populate list box with users. Let's go ahead and send it the users to populate. So let's do the same thing here. Let's generate the method. Let's move this private method to the bottom of my class. And we have an IEnumerable of users. Let's do the same thing here. Okay. Now here, what I want to do is lst users.items.clear. So I want to go ahead and clear that message to the user to select the users they would like to work with. And then I'm going to for each through my list of users in my collection of users. Let's go ahead and make that a list. And then I can say lstusers.items.add. Let's go ahead and add users item. Sorry, I started thinking about something else there for a second. .toString. Trying to think about the next steps as I do it. So I'm going to add the string representation of each user to this list box, so I'm displaying it to my user of this application. And the thing I was thinking about is I'm going to go ahead, because once this method completes, these users are going to be gone. So what I actually want to do is I'm going to get the users and actually kind of save them at the top of my class, so that way they're not gone once I display them, because we're going to need them to do some work like add new users and delete users and whatnot. So users we're working with, and I'll go ahead and get set. Okay. Let's go ahead and say users we're working with equals users. I'm going to do the same thing here. Do the same thing down here, but they equal active users. And then we're going to display them in our list box. So let's see if that works. Let's go ahead and start. Please select the users you'd like to work with. Let's get only active users. Uh-oh. Is this desktop proxy that's null again? I swore I ran into this last week. Let's go here. Yeah, I bet it's this one that's null. So let's go ahead and say equals new user db proxy. So instead of doing it in the initialized components, I'm just going to go ahead and do it here, because I don't know why it keeps going away. Let's try running that again. Okay, so we actually have the users, the active users here. We just don't have a string representation of them yet. So we actually need to override the toString inside user. So if you remember, list, well, our user does not have an overridden toString implementation. So whenever we call toString, all it's going to do is just tell us what object we're working with. So let's go ahead and go to our user class that we have in our entities folder. And now we have a username and a cancel date. Here I also want to add the ID, int ID. Let's go ahead and get set. And let's also provide an implementation for our toString method. So override, we want to override object's toString method. And let's go ahead and say return username and let's return their, if we're active users, they won't have a cancel date, so the cancel date will be null. So how do we want to display the cancel date? So let's say if the cancel date is nullable, so dot has value. What do I want to do here? Maybe I want to modify this get up here. Let's go ahead and put this on a new line, put this on a new line. Let's modify how this is gonna be got. Okay, now let's say get so if cancel date equals null, what do we want to do if cancel date is null? I'm not sure if this is the way I want to solve this problem or not. Let's just go back to what I had. Okay. Let's make a private method to get it. We could also create a property up here, which it might be what I'll do. So let's say private string cancel date to string, and I'm going to say cancel date dot has value. I'm going to return cancel date dot value dot to short date string. Otherwise, if it doesn't have a value, I'm just going to return active user. So they haven't canceled their membership or whatever. So let's go ahead and say cancel date string. So now my toString representation is the username, and the cancel date is whatever is coming back from the string property that I have that essentially wraps my cancel date. So it looks at the cancel date and figures out if it has a value, then show it. Otherwise, show that the user is an active user, so it doesn't have a cancel date. Let's go ahead and see if that works. So let's get all users and display them. So now we have a toString representation. Here we have my first user, that's my UC email address, the cancel date, active user, so that it doesn't have a cancel date. This one, the cancel date was 12/12/2019. So if I only get active users, this record should go away, and it does. So here I'm only getting active users. So let's go ahead and add a form that adds a user to the database. So here in my entities, let's close out of this again. Let's add a form, user main forms. Let's go ahead and add say new item. It's going to be a Windows form. Let's say add user form. Click add. And now we have this add user form. I'll go ahead and give it a text box to put the email address and a text box for the password. There's a text box, there's a text box. Let's put a couple labels to label the boxes. Alright, let's give this label a text property of username, and this one of password. Again, we're going to just save plain text passwords, which we should never do. You should always hash your passwords before you save them in the database with some SHA or something like that hashing algorithm. So here we're going to say txt username and txt password. And then here's how we're going to add users to our database. So let's go back. We have a user here that we'll send back to the main form. So let's go back to our main form and put a add user button on the main form. So this is like our user administration system. I want to add a button here. Let's make it uniform with the other buttons. Nice and big. We'll make this add user. Just for the sake of uniformity, let's go ahead and give it an exit button. Exit. btn exit. We can also set the cancel button on the form now that we have an exit button to btn exit. And go ahead and give this an implementation to close the form. And now let's go back and give our add user button an implementation. So what we want to do here is we want to first not have this. I must have never given my add user button a good name. So let's go ahead and get rid of this method, which will then break my add user form. So let's go back and give our button a good name. Here's my add user button. btn add user. Now we should have a better name for a button, which we do. So the first thing I want to do is new up my form. So I have an add user form equals new add user form. And then I can say add form.showDialog. So I want to actually show the form. And let's go ahead and capture the result here of which button they clicked. Which reminds me, I don't think I ever put buttons on the form. Let's go back and put a couple buttons. Let's put a button for cancel. btn cancel. And a button for OK. btn OK. Or submit button or whatever, however you want to name it. Let's do submit. btn submit. Alright. So here we can simply close the form. And then here we actually want to provide an implementation for adding a user to the database. So let's go ahead and close out this form. See if there's anything else I can close out of. Okay. So let's go ahead and get the user. So the var the user that they're trying to add equals new user. And we might need to add our entities since it's not seeing it. So let's go ahead and add using our entities because we want to use that user and not the database user. And let's go ahead and do an object initializer. And we're going to say the username equals txt username and the password. I guess we don't save the password on that other user, do we? So let's go ahead and add our password over here. Public string password. Okay. So the password equals txt password dot text and dot text. Okay, so here's the user. Let's go ahead and assign that user to the tag property. So this tag equals user to add. And let's go ahead and set the dialog result equal to dialog result.ok. So we know they clicked the OK button. So let's go back to our other form. Add user. We got the result. So if the result equals dialog result.ok, so if they click the OK button, that's when we want to add this user to the database. So the first thing we'll have to do is we have this desktop proxy which goes to our database. So we need to add a method to add the user. So dot add new user, and we don't have an implementation for that yet. Let's go ahead and pass the add form dot tag as user. And then we can populate our list box again. After we figure out it was a new user, so get active users. I might just comment this out because I don't think it really makes much sense just to get active users. It was good to use for what we used it for. Let's go ahead and comment this out though. So we can only work with all of the users. So we get the users here. So let's go ahead and refactor this. Let's generate a method. Extract method. Populate users from database. Okay, so our populate users from database method. Let's go ahead and move. No, I'll just keep it there since pretty much everything here is private. So whenever someone gets users, I'm going to say populate the users from the database. which will then reach out to the database, set the users we're working with to the users from the database, and then it's going to populate our list box. So down here I can say add new user and then go out and get the users and populate them from the database again. So that'll make more sense after I add the user here. So let's go ahead and generate the method here. So after I generated the method, now it should have generated it over here. So I'm getting a lot of errors now for some reason. I'm using system.link, so I don't know why it's complaining. This should be entities.user. Database.user. Okay, looks like that's better now. Okay, so now we need to give an implementation to add new user. So to add user, we're just going to do the same thing, just create a method in our database to add the user. So user DAO dot add user, and we're going to send it the user that we have. Uh-oh. And then again, let's implement this method. Usually we'd have an interface or something, but for brevity, I'm not creating an interface for all of these methods. What does it not like about this? I got rid of a reference, but let's put it back. I might need to send it the database user type, but let me make sure, because I project this to this type, so I might need to project it the other direction because of the namespace conflicts. Let's go ahead and add user. Let's go and see what it did in my database proxy. So user DAO. So it just might need, but it probably won't like it because it's going to have a circular dependency. So let's not do what we just did. I don't want to do this. So this user is the database user, which it is, the user that we use in our database. So in my proxy, I'm going to need to map that over. So let's send it new database.user. The username equals user.username, and the password equals user.password. Okay. So now it likes that a little better. Let's go to our database. Throw in another using statement. Var desktop equals new desktop entities. Okay. And now we actually need to insert a stored procedure here to insert a new user into our database. So I had one and I deleted it. but luckily I saved it over in my Notepad document. So let's go to SQL Server, Management Studio, and we're going to add a stored procedure in to add a user to our database table. Yep, that's the server instance I would like to connect to. Database, desktop. So here's our users table. Maybe. An update is available. Pass. Let's go ahead and add a stored procedure. New stored procedure. Let's get rid of a lot of this stuff. My stored procedure is going to be in my desktop database. That's fine. And let's go ahead and paste it here. Okay. Create procedure. So I'm going to create a new stored procedure called insert user. It's going to be attached to the database owner schema. The parameters that it's going to take in is the username and a password. Then it's going to insert into users the username and password and cancel date, the values, the username that got passed in, the password that got passed in, and I'm going to insert null for the cancel date since it's going to be a new user. Let's go ahead and F5. Command completed successfully. So now if we refresh our stored procedures, we should see it. So here's our new stored procedure with our parameters. And it returns an integer, which is essentially how many rows were updated. So it should update one row, as it should insert one user. So let's go ahead and exit out of that. We have our stored procedure. Now we need to go back to Visual Studio and update our entity data model with our new stored procedure call. So here's our entity data model. We can go to our model browser and see all of our stored procedures here on the right hand side. And I want to add a function import. Maybe that's not what I want to do. Okay, stored procedures. I want to update the model from the database. And here it shows me my insert new user stored procedure that I just created. So let's go ahead and check that checkbox and click Finish. And now it actually creates all of that ADO.NET code that we created back in week 10 to call this stored procedure. And notice that it puts a little star up here, so you have to save it for it to generate all that code. Okay, so now going back to the Solution Explorer. Here's my user. And then inside my desktop entities, you should now see your stored procedure insert user here. And notice here's all of the ADO.NET code that it generated for us to work with this stored procedure. So it created our SQL parameters for us, and it actually created an execute function to execute the stored procedure with those parameters. So let's go back, and now we can say var result equals desktop.insert user, and now we can call it just like a method. So now we can see that insert user takes in a username and a password, so we can say user.username and user.password. And we're not actually going to do anything with the result. We could make sure that it was successful. We could make sure that it updated one row, kind of like we did in the ADO.NET application that we did for the products. But that's definitely something we could do, and we could have it return back the integer, or maybe even an error message if an error occurred. But let's go back. Uh-oh. No, what error? What's going on here? Oh, okay, so I think I commented out that method, so I'm just going to go ahead and comment out this as well. I commented out the active users method since we're only going to work with all users, so that should get rid of that error. Okay, so please select the users I would like to work with. We are not working with active users, so let's just get all of our users. Okay, so now here we're working with these two users. Let's add a user. So here's our new username form. New user at yahoo.com. And the password will just be password. Okay, so now what it should do, going back here, is the add user code. So it should take that result, and if the result is okay, we're going to go ahead and add that user to our database using our new stored procedure. And then we're going to go ahead and populate the users from the database after the insert, which actually reaches back out. Gets all the users, and then populates the users here to our list box. So let's go ahead and see if all of that stuff that I wired up works. Let's click submit. And now it gets my new user from the database. Cancel date is active user. Okay, so now we have the add user. We're adding users to our databases using stored procedures. Let's go ahead and click the exit button. So the last thing, let's cancel a user's record in our application. So whenever they click a user, let's get the ID for that user and actually set the cancel date in our database. Let's go ahead and get rid of this button since we commented that out. Let's drag a new button on our form here. I'm going to call this button cancel user and let's say btn cancel user. Okay, so now that I have this button, I'd like to put some logic around when this button is enabled. So first, right when you open the form, let's have this button disabled by default, because you actually need to get whichever user you're going to work with before you click this button. So enabled is going to be false. So essentially, please select the user you'd like to work with, because you really can't do anything until you select a user. So this is going to be grayed out right now. But maybe whenever they click get users, that's when we can say this.btn cancel user dot enabled equals true. But maybe still don't even do it there. Now that I think about it, let's not do that yet. So let's go here. And there should be an event selected index changed. Yes. So I want to do a selected index changed event on that. So let's say if the lst users dot selected index is greater than -1, then I want to set that to true. Let's do this a little different. Let's get rid of this if. Let's make this a ternary. So I'm going to say btn user enabled. Because really that's the only thing this is going to do. So let's make this a lambda. And I'm going to say this button is enabled equals otherwise false. Okay, so if the selected index changed, then I want to do something with my enabled property. So if the selected index is greater than -1, I'm going to make it enabled to true. Otherwise, I still want it to be disabled. So let's see if that works. So I want to get all users. And I want to select one, and here it's enabled. Let's click away. Okay, so it's still enabled. Still enabled. Okay, so it looks like it works. I was thinking if you click down here that it would be -1, but it doesn't look like it. Okay, so now we have users. Okay. So now we have some logic around when this occurs. So let's go ahead and click the cancel user button and provide an implementation for this cancel user button. So the first thing I want to do is get the index that is selected. So the index equals lst users dot selected index. So now we know that it shouldn't be -1 because the button shouldn't be enabled until they select a user. So we don't really need to put any logic around or have they actually selected a user because the button is not enabled until they do select a user. So now we can say the user that's selected equals, so we saved our users that they're working with up here. So we can actually get the users they're working with. Dot get, did I make this an IEnumerable? Yeah. So let's do a .toList dot get I'm looking for a specific method. Am I using system.link? Yeah, I am. Okay, let's not do that then. Let's just use the index here. Alright, so yeah, we actually need .toList. Okay. So now we should have a single user. And now we can go ahead and set that user's cancel date to today. So let's, here's our database proxy dot cancel user. Okay. And when we cancel the user, really the only thing we care about is the user that's selected dot other ID. So let's just send the ID to the next area. So let's go ahead and generate the method here. In our proxy, let's go to our proxy here. And let's call our user DAO dot cancel user. Let's send it the ID. Generate the method. And let's actually call our database here. So using var desktop equals new desktop entities. All right, so now we actually need a stored procedure to do this work. So let's go back to our, do I not have SQL? Oh, there's SQL Server. Okay. Let's go ahead and steal some of this. So let's go new stored procedure. Again, let's get rid of a lot of this stuff. We're still going to be using our desktop database. Create procedure. We only need one parameter. That's going to be the ID, which will be an integer. And let's update users. We want to set the cancel date equal to, let's go ahead and call the getDate function in SQL, where the ID equals the ID that we passed. Let's go to F5. Oh, I didn't give it a good name, so let's cancel user. Let's F5 again. All right. Command completed successfully, so let's go back to Visual Studio. Now let's actually stay here and refresh. And sure enough, here's our new cancel user stored procedure. So let's go back and add that to our EDMX here. Let's go back to our model browser, our stored procedures. Let's update our database. And here's our cancel user stored procedure. Let's go ahead and click finish. Always remember to save it so it generates that ADO.NET code for us again. And then wait for it to stop spinning. Alright, so if we go back to Solution Explorer, we should be able to see inside our entities our new insert user ADO.NET code that was generated for us. So here that is. Okay, so now I should be able to go desktop.cancel user, and I should be able to pass it that integer ID that I have here. Okay. So let's go back here again to our main form, cancel user, And then after I do that, let's go ahead and update the form again. So populate users from database, and let's click start. See if this works. So I want to get all the users from my database. These two users are active, so let's go ahead and cancel this first one. Alright, the button becomes active. I'm going to go ahead and cancel this user. Usually it'd be nice to have a pop-up or something, are you sure you want to cancel this user? I didn't put that in, maybe that'd be a nice enhancement to do once I finish making sure this works. Let's cancel the user. Doesn't look like it did anything. Cancel user. Did I not call it? ID. Alright, what am I doing wrong here? Let's go here. Set a breakpoint. Let's give the users, active user, cancel user. Okay. What did I mess up? Let's F10. The index is 0, which is what I want. I should select the cancel date is null. The ID is 0. Oh, I never mapped over my ID into this. Okay, so whenever I get the users, I need to map over that ID. That's where I went wrong, I think. So let's go to my proxy. I project it to a new user type. Here I need to map over that ID, because right now it's 0. User.id. Okay. That's why breakpoints are your friend. Let's go back here. Let's get rid of that breakpoint, see if that fixes it. Actually, no. Let's leave the breakpoint and see that I have an ID here now. Get users. Here's the user I want to cancel. User selected. So now the ID is 1, and I believe that's the ID that I had in the database. Okay, so let's see if that works now. Let's get my users. I want to cancel this user. Cancel. And now the cancel date is today. So that's the issue that I never mapped over that ID. I remember putting the ID on the user, but I never actually mapped it over to our entities.user type. So there should probably be some logic around this. Is the user already canceled? If the user is canceled, then maybe pop up a message, hey, this user is already canceled. Obviously there should probably be some different logic around that, but it does show that we can call stored procedures. We can have any sort of SQL statements that we like in here. So if I go back to SQL Server, we can see that I have an update statement. We have an insert statement. We can delete a user if we like. Usually for relational databases, it's not the best to delete users. Usually you can just select a deleted flag or something to true or false. But you definitely could, if you wanted to hard delete the user, you could do that as well. With a delete statement, you can have views that you import the same way that you do stored procedures, so you can have complex logic around how you'd like to view certain information in your database that you can then update in your EDMX. So you can see all of the benefits and how you can leverage SQL and Entity Framework to do work inside your Visual Studio instance. So I hope this helps. I hope this video is useful. and make sure you reach out with any questions or concerns you may have, and have a good week. Thanks.